Back in 2017, after 10 consecutive playoff appearances and only a few years removed from winning 60 games and making the Eastern Conference Finals, the Atlanta Hawks began an aggressive rebuild. They began to focus on the future with a 3 to 4 year plan that focused on acquiring young talent and maintaining the flexibility to add a star in free agency or via a trade, with the goal of becoming a young, up-and-coming team with a championship future. And now, here we are 3 seasons later with the 2019-20 season now officially over for the Hawks, and if you ask the NBA fans which teams they feel like have the brightest futures in the league, I think that the Hawks would be one of the first teams mentioned for many of them. However, in my opinion, the future of the Atlanta Hawks is actually in danger. Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about why the Atlanta Hawks, a team that seems to have a bright future, aren't actually the future contenders that so many people seem to think that they are. So one of the reasons that the Hawks are continually perceived as a team that has such a bright future is because of all of this young talent that they supposedly have on the roster, and they certainly have the young part of it sorted out. Going into next season, every single player under contract for the Hawks right now is 26 years old or younger, with the exception of Dwayne Dedmon, and 6 of those players are 22 years old or younger. So as I said, they have the young part of this down, but what about the talent aspect? Well, I'm not sure that this roster is actually as talented as many people seem to think. First, let's talk about maybe the most controversial player on the roster, John Collins. He's a 2021 restricted free agent, a 4-5 type player that just averaged 21 and 10 while shooting 40% from 3 on over 3 attempts per game. And the list of NBA players in history to do that is not very long. In fact, it's just Collins and Karl Anthony Towns. Now, if you bump the three-point percentage down to just 35%, the list is Collins, Towns, Kevin Love, Joel Embiid, and DeMarcus Cousins. And every single one of those players was either making a ton of money at the time that they did this, or they went on to sign a new huge deal after completing this kind of a statistical season. And the only exception to that really is DeMarcus Cousins, who was on a big money deal, but didn't sign a new one after tearing his Achilles. So my point is, players like this that put up statistics like John Collins just did, they typically get paid, and Collins himself has publicly put himself into the max contract conversation in his own opinion. But outside of that impressive statistical performance, there are plenty of flaws that you can find in Collins' game. The Hawks haven't won 30 games in his 3-year career yet, and I know they weren't really trying to win games, but still, he played 24, 30, and 33 minutes per game on those teams, so you have to at least give him some of the fault for that. However, they did go 16 and 25 with him in the lineup this year, so you have to give him some credit for that because that's an upgrade from their overall winning percentage as a team. And one of the other problems with Collins' game is that he's undersized for the 5 spot, and he's not a great defender either, so you have to play him at the 4 a good amount of the time. And yes, he can play the 5, but if you're playing him on the floor as your rim protector and Trae Young is on the floor as well, you're going to give up about 1 million points per game, so that's a problem. Now, to his credit, throughout his career, he's done a really good job of improving his off-ball shooting and his 3-point shot so that he can play the 4 more effectively, but he doesn't really give you any of the playmaking or attacking of closeouts that you'd like to see generally from a perimeter player, and at this point in the modern NBA, the 4 is pretty much a perimeter spot. Now, the best thing that he does is he's a really good rim roller and an incredible finisher at the rim because he's such a great athlete, but if you want him to do that at the 4, then you have to accommodate him to be able to do that by having a floor spacer at the 5, and I'm not positive that John Collins is a type of player that you want to be accommodating your team and your offense for. Which is why, ever since the Hawks traded for Clint Capella, who is a more traditional two-way 5-man, there have been some John Collins trade rumors. And with his upcoming free agency, this is an interesting situation to keep an eye on. And the Hawks have set a precedent before within this own rebuild of trading away young players that they simply didn't want to pay when they traded away Taurean Prince to the Nets last summer. In a similar situation, Prince was a productive player for the Hawks, albeit not on the same level as Collins from a per-game standpoint, and in advance of his free agency, the Hawks traded him away because they did not want to pay him. They got a 2019 first-round pick and the Nets 2020 top 14 protected pick in exchange for Prince, and taking on some salary, and they used that 2019 pick on Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but it was actually used to trade up in order to draft DeAndre Hunter at 4th overall. So based off of the history of this rebuild and that precedent that has been set by Atlanta of trading away players that they didn't want to pay, and the circumstances of the Capella trade, it makes sense that we might see a John Collins trade as well. But one thing that's really important to consider here is how much value does John Collins actually have in a trade, because I see plenty of Hawks fans talking about how much value he does have, and I'm not sure it's actually as high as many people think when you're considering his 2021 free agency and all of the other flaws that I've mentioned to this point about Collins' game and his fit, not only with the Hawks, but with other teams around the league. When you really look at where he could potentially go, and what I do is I just simply pull up the NBA standings and see if a team jumps out at me as a really good trade partner. When I do that for John Collins, I don't really see many teams that jump out at me and say, hey, this would be a really good situation for Collins, and therefore the Hawks could get a great return for him. Now, I understand that Collins is just 22 years old, but I personally think that the Hawks are going to end up trading him in advance of his 2021 free agency and maybe not get a ton of value in return, likely some more lottery protected first round picks. So outside of Collins, what else is there really on this roster? So let's talk about DeAndre Hunter. He's a player that I really like, but he does need to continue to be more efficient from the field and from three-point range than he was as a rookie, and I would expect that to be the case. And the defense is also there, which is nice, and he's a really good complementary piece moving forward. He showed great improvement in college from his first to his second year at Virginia, especially with his shooting percentages, and I personally would expect that to continue in the NBA. However, pay close attention to what I said earlier. I referred to him as a complementary piece. That was always what DeAndre Hunter was supposed to be. That's why a lot of people didn't like the fact that he was drafted so high, because it's very unlikely that he is going to end up becoming a star. His role was always going to be a high-end complementary piece, and so far to this point in his rookie season, that has certainly tracked. So I like him. He's going to be a good player, but not the second star that this Atlanta team needs. Now let's talk about Cam Reddish, and I've certainly already given plenty of opinions on this guy in different videos. He shot under 40% from the field as a rookie. There was certainly improvement as the months went on, but whether that is legit improvement or the Josh Jackson effect, as I've mentioned in a previous video, remains to be seen. And regardless, I'm just not a Cam Reddish fan, and he's very boom or bust to me, and he's far from a sure thing. Then you got Clint Capella, and we pretty much know who this guy is at this point. He rolls to the rim, protects the rim, is a really good lob threat, and he'll be a nice big to have alongside Trae Young, and likely fits better alongside Trae Young than John Collins does, and we'll have to see how he does without James Harden alongside him, but they have him on an okay contract until he turns 30, and he's not a game-changing piece, but it's nice that he's there. And then lastly is Kevin Huerter, and honestly, I was kind of hoping to see more from him this season. His improvement was basically just a jump in minutes and shots, resulting in higher per game averages this year, and really just an okay starting two next to Trae moving forward is probably the best case scenario for him at this point. And he's going to need a new contract in 2022. And again, he's not a star. So again, I ask, what really do we have here in Atlanta? Now, we do have a 21-year-old all-star starter in Trae Young that almost averaged 30 and 10 this season, but he has flaws of his own. He's one of the worst defenders in the entire league. He needs to continue to be more efficient. You kind of have to fit everything you do around what he does, and he's averaging almost 5 turnovers per game, so certainly not a perfect player. Then we have another high stats with questionable overall impact on the team guy in John Collins that has just 1 year left on his contract. Then there's a really nice future complementary option in DeAndre Hunter that fits well with this team, but it's really unlikely that he's going to become a star. A solid 5 in Clint Capella that's really not going to get any better from here. And then we have 2 questionable wings moving forward in Cam Reddish and Kevin Huerter that both have potential, but it's pretty unlikely that they are going to become the second star that this team needs and fulfill the potential that they do have. Now, at this point of the video, some of you are probably thinking that this is still such a young team, that they still have plenty of time to try and figure this out and let their young players develop and grow, right? However, that isn't really the case, and modern rebuilds go really quickly in the NBA if you want to do them right by taking advantage of all-stars on rookie contracts. And if they want to keep Collins, then he'll need a big deal in 2021, and then Trae Young will need a max contract in 2022, and suddenly you're at or over the salary cap and your flexibility is limited without without accounting for extensions for Kevin Huerter, DeAndre Hunter, Cam Reddish, and whoever your 2020 high draft pick is going to be. So they're not really right up against it right now, but they're closer to the end of this timeline than you might think. Now, at this point in the video, you could just give one big counterpoint here to everything I've said and just say, well, why can't they just wait it out? They've got a 21-year-old superstar in Trae Young. They've got these younger players. They can let them grow and develop. And yes, the extension stuff and the salary cap stuff isn't ideal the further along you go in this, but they have plenty of time to wait and to figure it out. Well, that's assuming that Trae Young does not become unhappy in Atlanta. There's already been some frustration publicly as a result of all the losing, and typically modern stars in the NBA don't stick around for very long when their teams aren't successful, which is why we've seen some moves from Atlanta to try and get some better pieces around him, like the Clint Capella deal, but that already shows you how limited of a window this can typically be in a rebuild as aggressive as this in Atlanta. Now, with all the other things in this video said, none of them are as big of an issue to me as what I'm going to talk about now, and that is a lack of a second star in Atlanta. And you would have liked to see them already have that guy on the roster to this point in the rebuild and have a bona fide star, a future star, alongside of Trae Young, and I just don't really think that that's the case. For example, the Memphis Grizzlies have Jaren Jackson Jr. and Ja Morant, and yeah, it took some lottery luck to get those guys, but still, if you have two stars, you can basically just say, okay, we're gonna pay these two guys a max when we have to and try and fit everything else around them, also known as what Dallas is doing with Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis once they end up paying Luka. So it's been established that the Atlanta Hawks need a second star, and you do that either through free agency, the draft, or a trade. Now, everybody knows that the summer of 2021 is going to be a big year for free agency, and the Hawks will have plenty of cap space, assuming they don't do anything crazy with John Collins' new contract or they just trade him away to a different team. But the problem is, I don't really see the Hawks as a true free agency destination. This is a kind of team that needs success to really get players' attention in free agency, and they just don't have that right now. If they were winning 45 games and getting to the postseason with this young roster, then maybe they would be a legit destination, but I just don't see it right now. Now, in terms of the draft, they do have the fourth best lottery odds right now, but there aren't likely to be any stars coming to Atlanta in the 2020 class. There are some high potential players in this class, but they pretty much all either aren't a great fit, need time to develop, and that's time that the Hawks don't really have, or are more likely to be DeAndre Hunter high complimentary type of guys. Which leaves us then with just the trade avenue. With or without John Collins, this Hawks team can absolutely put together an intriguing trade package for a star. They have assets that teams that would like to add some young pieces or have more time to wait around on their development than the Hawks do could certainly want. I personally would do my best to keep DeAndre Hunter and Clint Capella on the roster simply because I like their fit, but Huerter, Reddish, Collins, or the assets you get in exchange for him in a previous trade, plus maybe even the 2020 rookie depending on the type of player I'm trading for, seems like a nice trade package. And they also have the Nets 2020 first and a 2022 lottery protected Oklahoma City first round pick. So they have plenty of trade assets, but who exactly would they be trading for? And this is a really difficult question because, as I mentioned, the 2021 free agency class is going to be huge, and that means that it's unlikely that the Hawks are going to be able to trade for any of those guys that are going to be 2021 free agents, because you don't want to be trading for a rental, especially with a young team when you're trading away so many assets. And then the other part of this is you really need a star that fits extremely well with Trae Young, and that's difficult to find because it's someone that's not incredibly ball dominant and can guard at least a little bit, or more ideally is a really good defender. Because yes, the DeAndre Hunter-Clint Capella combo can certainly help defensively behind Trae Young and help hide him a little bit, but for example, if Devin Booker suddenly becomes unhappy, I don't really think that's a very good fit at all in Atlanta when you're talking about two really ball dominant players they can't really defend. So again, I ask, who exactly would the Atlanta Hawks trade for with all these trade assets when they're trying to acquire a second star? Well, I have two really crazy names to throw out there here. The first is Victor Oladipo, and I understand that he is a 2021 free agent, so it's unlikely, but if Indiana doesn't like how he recovers from his injury, / thinks that Malcolm Brogdon is their on-ball answer for now, / wants to look more towards the future, / don't want to pay Oladipo in the summer of 2021, maybe he could be available. He isn't incredibly ball dominant, he can really defend, and he provides veteran leadership for Trae. I understand that it's unlikely, but what about Reddish, Dedmon for salary matching purposes, the Brooklyn first and 2 second-round picks in exchange for Victor Oladipo. And I understand that that's a lot for a 2021 free agent and a guy coming off of a huge injury, and it requires an incredibly specific set of circumstances, but Indiana would need a lot to consider trading him within the Eastern Conference, and I think that the Hawks would be a nice fit. That would give Atlanta a core of Trae Young, Victor Oladipo, assuming he re-signs in 2021, Hunter, Collins would still be available for trade, or they could just keep him, Capella, plus their own 2020 rookie who's going to be a high draft pick. Okay, I understand that was a crazy one, but again, that shows you how difficult it is to really find a star to trade for right now for Atlanta, but now we're gonna get even crazier. The next potential trade target here is Ben Simmons. And again, I know that this is a crazy one because if Philly ever did move on from Ben Simmons, I highly doubt that it would be within the Eastern Conference. But hear me out. Let's just say that the Sixers do eventually have to pick between Simmons and Embiid, and they want to keep Embiid. Who can offer a better package than Atlanta? They would be highly motivated to give up a ton because of all the circumstances I've outlined so far, and Simmons is a really, really good fit in Atlanta, in my opinion. Yes, he needs the ball some, but they have good enough spacing in Atlanta to make it work, and he's such a great defender and provides them with much needed versatility, perimeter size, and rebounding. Again, this is unlikely, but what about Cam Reddish, John Collins, Kevin Huerter, Dwayne Dedmon, again, for salary matching purposes because Simmons will be in his new extension this offseason, the Nets 2020 first, and the Oklahoma City 2022 lottery protected first round pick. That gives the Sixers a ton of complementary pieces around Embiid that can still grow and improve along with Tobias Harris and Josh Richardson, and it gives the Hawks a group of Trae Young, Ben Simmons, DeAndre Hunter, Clint Capella, plus their own 2020 rookie to build around. Now, I bring up those scenarios in order to show you where the Hawks could potentially go from here in terms of acquiring a star via trade, but also to make a larger point. Do you see how unrealistic and how ridiculously tough it's going to be for the Hawks at this moment in time to acquire a second star for their roster? Those two trade circumstances were crazy, and whether it's via trade, via the draft, or free agency, it's going to be really difficult for the Hawks to bring in a second star, and that's what I mean when I really say that this team is in trouble. So ultimately, as I evaluate the situation with the Hawks, I'm not as optimistic as most people are. I don't see a ton of high-value young talent on the roster. The clock is already ticking as it relates to Trae Young and their salary cap situation, and the likelihood of getting a true star to pair with Trae Young isn't all that high. Things can certainly change, and they've done a good amount of things right in this rebuild, but right now I'm more confident that it will just be more of the same over the next few seasons for the Hawks, barring anything unforeseen, rather than any kind of ascension towards the top of the Eastern Conference. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.